Hello, I read 24 books in the month of June and I thought it would be kind of fun to review them, so I'm going to do that. So I did read 24 books this month, which is kind of insane, but they were really small, as you'll see. Like, I was reading books that were like 100 to 200 pages because that's just what I was into. I really wanted the satisfaction of finishing a book, and that was all I wanted. So it was like short story collections and then really short books, which is how I got to 24 books in 1 month. Also, like, an extreme case of mental illness definitely contributed to that. Okay, so the first book I read this month was A Minor Chorus by Billy Ray Belcourt. It's about a gay Cree man who leaves academia and goes back to his hometown of northern Alberta to write a novel. He interviews a whole bunch of people, and it's kind of like his life story, life experiences woven in with the interviews that he does and the stories of other people. Nothing really happens in this book. It's not a drag. Like, that's the thing, is that Belcourt's prose is so fucking delicious, and like his handle on the English language is unlike anything I've ever seen. That nothing needed to happen in this book, and I'm someone who really likes plot. I don't really like a book that's just vibes, but I loved this. The only problem with this is that it made me want to write, and so it kind of put me in a reading slump because the only thing I wanted to do was write, and every time I picked it up I was just like, oh, actually I want to be a writer. I don't actually want to read right now. There's themes of like loneliness and like a lack of control of your situation. It asks a lot of questions that it doesn't necessarily set out to answer. And I'm going to read a quote for you. I had awkwardly placed my right hand on the computer desk to balance, a clumsy maneuver he interpreted as a plea. So he squatted to pull my tight pant legs off one after the other, a moment of spontaneous and outsized tenderness that both of us could only recognize with a laugh. I would read a novel about paint drying written by this man, maybe one of the best writers of this generation. And that's really bold to say from someone who only really started reading new fiction in the last 2 years. The next book I read I don't have because someone wanted it at the library. It was Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata. I love her. This had like all the classic themes of like being an outsider of society and like the critique of conformist society that I really, really liked in Earthlings. This wasn't as weird or as gross as Earthlings, but it definitely was really fucking strange. Convenience Store Woman is about a woman who works at a convenience store, and she doesn't really fit in at all with society. She's just kind of doing things that she has been taught that she needs to value. I love books about obsessive and like mentally ill women, and this was one of them. It's like how she makes sense of the world in such a strange way. The characters are so weird and so insufferable and so compelling, and it was just like a really, really gripping read. Okay, the next book I read this month was The Embalmer by Anne-Renée Caillé. This is a translation from French, and it's kind of set up as like the notes that a woman takes while interviewing her father who worked as an embalmer. It's sort of like his disjointed, rambling retellings of some like strange and like kind of harrowing and disturbing deaths that he has seen in his line of work. It explores like mortality towards the end of the book. She starts thinking about like the mortality of her parents, but it doesn't really do anything. It's not the character study that the blurb set it out to be, and it also has no plot. Like, it's just a bunch of stories. It was fine. It was like 3.5 stars. I wouldn't recommend this to anyone, but I don't think it was horrible. Don't ask me why I read this next book because I'm going through something and I don't want to talk about it. This was The New Masculinity by Alex Manley, and I kind of hated this. I think this was the only nonfiction book that I finished this month because I just wasn't in the mood for nonfiction, so that could have been part of it. But I also have read a lot of nonfiction in my life, and this just like was not good nonfiction. This was just really poorly researched, and it was also really poorly formatted, and the two things together were not great. I have never read a book where the citations are in the footnotes at the bottom of the page. That is what this is, which means that some of these pages are like half footnotes, and it's just it's links, and that's my main problem, is that it's fucking links. The author will cite a study, and then the citation for it will not be the original study. It will be some like very simplistic internet article that explains the study. Like, you didn't read the original study that you're citing. I knew this wasn't going to be all that insightful because it is directed towards like young men. I thought I could learn some things. I don't really think I learned anything. And I also think that this pushes to the side the harms that women experience from toxic masculinity by like saying this isn't a book for women, this is a book for men. I do think Alex Manley is very progressive, and I don't think this is like problematic. I think it just like was lazy throughout all of my problems with it. Like, the main point is that it's just kind of lazy. Was there anything nice I had to say about this? It's only complaints. Despite claiming to be for young men, this book didn't really know who its audience was. Like, there's no one who this book is for. Maybe this book is for the author to have written a book, and like, good for them. I wasted my time reading it though, and I lied when I said that that was the next book that I read, because actually I read a book before that, I just don't have it, and that was Foster by Claire Keegan. I didn't know this was a popular book. I understand why it's a popular book. I just saw it on the shelf of the library, and it was small. It was really small. It was really short. There's really big margins. Like, there's not many words in this book. Foster is about a young girl in rural Ireland who's sent to live with some like distant family friends for the summer. She doesn't really know them, but I think they know her from when she was a baby. And following her journey through like this quiet sort of trepidation, nervousness about living with these people, to like being content, to being truly comfortable with them, and like accessing this care that she hasn't really known in her family of origin, is beautiful. There's such a journey that the book takes you on. The depth of this narrator is incredible. Claire Keegan has this really nice balance where she doesn't make her child character seem like an adult, but she also doesn't like dumb them down, which I find really annoying in books, when like people obviously think really lowly of children's emotional intelligence, and like it comes through in the writing. It's just annoying. It's so well written, not a word is wasted. I'm gonna read a quote. "Her hands are like my mother's hands, but there is something else in them too, something I have never felt before and have no name for. I feel at such a loss for words, but this is a new place and new words are needed." I think that sums it up really well. I gave this book 4.75 stars, and the more I think about it, the more I think it might have been a 5-star read, and I also kind of want to just read it again. The next book I do have, this is Malagash by Joey Comeau. This is kind of similar to Foster, mainly just in that it's a small book. It's not similar at all. They're not similar at all. It's a small book, and the narrator is like a young girl. Her dad has cancer, so her and her family move back to her dad's hometown of Nova Scotia so he can die in peace. It's just this like incredible portrayal of grief and family dynamics. It's also like witty and funny. As her dad is dying, she is recording everything that he says to everyone so that she can like turn him into a computer virus, which sounds strange, but it just like, this book makes it make so much sense. All of her choices are so driven by what's going on around her. You just like really get in the head of the character. My one gripe with this is that her name is Sunday, and I think that's cringe as fuck, but you can actually get past it. Her name is Sunday and her little brother's name is Simon. What kind of parents? That's like so fucked up. The characterization is really the strong suit of this book. They're all like lovable and smart and nuanced and vivid. I think this is a 5-star book. I loved it. I'm actually going to read a quote from it. Thank you. Sorry. Actually, I'm going to. "I know that I'm not actually angry at my mother. I love my mother, and I love her the most when she's like this, when she has that laugh hidden in her voice. But I don't want to let go of my frustration yet either. It's comforting to be sitting out here feeling this way. Like I'm finally feeling the right thing at the right time. She's going to ruin that. She's going to make me laugh." Like, the family dynamics, it's perfect. The next book I read was a collection of short stories called How to Pronounce Knife. This sort of just centers around the Lao immigrant experience in Canada. I thought it was okay. I kind of think it was forgettable, and I don't think the writing was all that strong. There were two that stood out to me. One about this woman and her mother becomes like obsessed with this country singer. That one was really, really interesting. And the last story of the collection, called Picking Worms, about a mother and daughter who go and pick worms in the morning. There's lots of like mother-daughter relationship dynamics explored in this that I liked. I read a lot of short story collections, and this just wasn't really for me. I don't think it was bad, but I also don't think it was like great. I like my short stories to be like packed full of like a really interesting premise, and I don't think this had much substance in that way, which kind of made it drag on for me. The next book I read, very similar vein, is another collection of short stories that is very Canadian. This I liked a little bit better, but I didn't think it was the strongest writing that I've ever read or the most interesting short stories that I've ever read. I think the blurb sets it up to be quite a lot better than it actually turns out as. This is like the classic lit fic themes of love, grief, betrayal. I think there were quite a few stories that had to do with like miscarriages and losing a pregnancy, Or I'm confusing that for another book, because actually, like, is that even true? It felt jarringly unedited sometimes. Like, there was one sentence where it said yawn twice. It needed to be picked through with a finer tooth comb. I also really struggle with books that are like screaming from the rooftop how Canadian they are. Like, I get it. It's set in Canada. You don't need to be like, we went from normal to perfect. That's a nitpick that actually really doesn't make any sense, but I just hate it. I just find that it takes me out of the book. There was no stories that were bad. It wasn't an incredible collection. After that, I read The Promise by Silvina Ocampo. This was published posthumously and it really felt like it was. It's about a woman who is floating adrift at sea after falling off of a boat, and she's kind of replaying the stories of her life based around specific people. The editor's note in the beginning kind of explains some of the problems I've had with it, saying, like, we do think that this is what she intended, but I don't know if it was. Like, it felt like a book that was unfinished and then published posthumously, because there are parts that just repeat verbatim. They tried to say it was something about, like, as the woman fell more and more into delirium while she's, like, dying in the ocean, she kind of, like, lost track of the story she was telling, but it didn't feel like that. It felt like a mistake, and it was boring to reread the same thing over and over again. I thought it would be a little bit more about drifting in the middle of the ocean, but it wasn't really. Like, it was mostly just her thoughts, and they had nothing to do with being in the ocean. Like, it was just her memories, really. I think it had a lot of potential, and I wish that the author had finished it while she was still alive, and that it wasn't published like this. It could have been something really good, which is probably why they wanted to publish it, and, like, I get that, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. I might recommend it if you're, like, smart. There is maybe more to it that I'm missing. It's also a translation. I think there was some things lost in that. I don't think it was, like, the best translation I've ever read. I've kind of been on, like, this train of being a hater for the past, like, 5 books. I'm sorry. I do like these books. This is my only DNF of the month. This is Crip, Kinship by Shayda Kafai. I hated it. Like, so much. I do like these books. This is, like, supposed to be about disability activism and disability justice, and it's not really. The writing is, like, very much chronically online Tumblr communities, like how they would talk about disability, in the way that it wants to include everyone so badly that it doesn't actually speak to anyone. Like, it doesn't say anything. Whenever this book tries to make a point about, like, the oppressive society that we live in, it will always list all forms of oppression. Like, every single time it will say the racist, ableist, cis heteropatriarchal society that we live in. So it doesn't really make any points. Like, it talks about oppression as this really broad thing, as if you can, like, lump all of those things together and still make a coherent argument. My main gripe with it is that it will say decolonize or bring up, like, decolonial. No, it won't bring up decolonial ideas. That's the thing. Like, that's the problem, is it will say decolonial, and then it has absolutely nothing about, like, indigenous epistemologies or, like, ways of being or knowing or anything like that. It just, like, uses it as a buzzword. This is just a book full of buzzwords. And I think what can kind of encapsulate what I'm talking about with this book is that anytime the author is talking about someone who uses she, they, or he, they pronouns, they will use both pronouns. I'm not kidding. This is how the whole book is written. Not just the first time you're introduced to someone or anything like that. They're helping Patty get ready for the day, adorning her/them with jewelry and combing and parting her/their damp hair. That is so fucking ridiculous. I cannot even believe it. I was, like, frustrated reading this book. It's so, like, sickly sweet, and, like, I don't want to say it's too inclusive, because that's not what I mean. Like, I wish I could form my thoughts on this much better than I am right now. It's kind of like, it's too woke. These damn liberals. I want my nonfiction to be tangible and actionable, and this is none of that. The next book I read was Beloved by Toni Morrison, and it was the best book that I read all year. I'm kind of embarrassed to admit that it was my first Toni Morrison. Like, I'm a little late to hop on this train, but I am on it. I'm the conductor. Everything everyone told you about Toni Morrison is correct. I don't even really want to tell you what Beloved is about. I think you should just go read it. I think everyone should just go read it. I don't have it here with me because I gave it to my mom, because I think that she should read it, and I want her to give it back so I can give it to more people so more people can read it. It is heart-wrenching, and it's, like, got this surrealism in it that is so well done. It's not the kind of book that I would typically read. I don't really like classics, and I kind of prefer my fiction to be set in this very specific time period of like 1995 to like 2012. Like, I don't really want like cell phones. I certainly don't want COVID in my books. I don't know. I've always thought that I was very picky about the setting, like the time setting of a book, but this has made me completely rethink that because it just doesn't fit with what I thought my preferences were, and I fucking loved it. The best book I've read all year. I doubt I will read a better book. After that, I read yet another short story collection, What Burns by Dale Peck. I just like did not read that many great short story collections this month. Dale Peck often writes about things that are like very taboo and very fucked up, but not in an interesting way or in a way where he's trying to say anything. He's just like trying to get the shock factor, and it's like boring. Like, I'm so bored by it. Like, he talks about these like crazy things, and I just find it so boring because he's not saying anything. He just wants you to be surprised. It's like really lazy writing. I wouldn't recommend this. I think it's kind of just silly and not in a fun way. Like, not in a deliberate way. There's one story in here where a man slowly figures out that everything he owns is borrowed from someone else, and that one is really good. So if you're gonna read one of those stories, I think you should read that one. It's just like, I don't know who published this. Soho Press. That was a mistake. After that, I read this very tiny little novella, The Cook by Maylis de Kerangal. It was fine. I think this is another short book that yet again sets out to be a character study and then isn't a character study and then also has no plot. This is just kind of like the story of the life of a man who is a cook. And like, that's all. Like nothing happens. Like, he is a cook and he cooks, and then he owns a restaurant. I did like the writing of this book. I think that she is a good writer. I found it very distracting how many lists she wrote. These lists of ingredients weren't adding anything to the book. They were kind of just padding it out, and I thought that was stupid. But if I can be sure that this author doesn't do that weird list thing in all of her other books, I would read more from her. I've written that I gave this 3.25 stars, but I remember it more as like a 3.75. But I guess I was really frustrated with the lists thing at the time. These are the anecdotes that build a legend, that help to create a logic along the lines of even when he was very young. Because, in truth, all that stuff about a calling, a voice whispering in the ear, a passion drawing the body forward in a firm straight line, there was none of that back then. It's good writing. Why'd she have to do so many lists? It's fucking stupid. After that, I read We Had to Remove This Post by Hannah Bervoets. I wanted more from this. I did like it. I think I was just expecting to like it so much, and then it didn't really live up to that. I thought that the story was told in a really... Maybe I'll tell you what it's about. Maybe I'll tell you what it's about first, because you don't care about my opinion. You want to know what the book's about. This book is about a woman who works as a content moderator. This is hugely about how this job affects her and her coworkers, and like this sort of radicalization that being exposed to horrible content can lead to. I thought it was really interesting how it dealt with how this group of people was really desensitized to horrible things. I just didn't love how overly linear the story was. It was like, this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. And it also was told in a very casual voice, but I thought those two things together made it seem almost juvenile. Like, it just wasn't very skilled writing to me. This is a translation from Dutch, and that might be part of it, but I do think that the overall structure was the main problem for me when reading this. I liked the premise a lot, and I liked what it was trying to say. I just don't think it said it very well. It is very short, like less than 200 pages, so I think if you're interested in the premise, you should read it, but you shouldn't expect like really good writing or like amazing storytelling. This is another 5-star read. This is Ghost Wall by Sarah Moss. I adore this book. This is about a teenage girl. I think she's around 17, and her parents joined this anthropology class doing a sort of reenactment of like Iron Age Britons in the woods. The protagonist's father is obsessed with history, and he really, really, really is interested in like these archaic gender roles and like the power he thinks he would have had if he had lived hundreds of years ago as an Iron Age Briton. The pacing is perfect. It's so tense, and it builds tension in such an interesting way, even though like for most of the books the stakes aren't actually that high. Looking back, they feel so high, and the relationships between the characters are amazing. The characters are so real and so believable, and the relationships between them are so interesting and well thought out. I think that the depiction of her father is this sort of like history bro, but also like absolute abusive asshole. That's a real guy. Like, he feels like a real dude, and that's what makes him so scary. The ending of this book made me cry. I thought it was beautiful and horrific. I loved this book. I recommend this book to anyone. After that, I read The Employees by Olga Haun. This is a workplace satire, but it's also a sci-fi book about the employees of a spaceship. Half of them are humans and half of them are like android kind of humanoids. And their spaceship has started picking up these items like relics or something. They're just really just objects. The humans and the humanoids on board the ship become obsessed with them, and it makes them feel these like really, really intense, crazy feelings. It's written as a series of statements from interviews from this like inquiry that's commissioned by the higher ups of the ship. There's not really like a story or a plot. It's kind of just like a whole bunch of vibes, and that didn't really work for me with this. I felt like I spent a lot of the time not really getting it. I don't really read sci-fi that often, so I think that was a huge part of why I didn't get it. The themes of like devoting yourself to work and like taking the piss out of corporate language were really well done. I just was kind of bored by it. Like, I was just waiting for it to finish. And again, this is a really short book, and so I wanted a bit more to be packed into it, I think. I felt confused for a lot of it. Like, I just think I'm not the kind of person who reads sci-fi, and this was like very much a sci-fi book, and I was expecting it, I think, to be a little bit less sci-fi than it was, and so I think that is my fault. If you like sci-fi, you would probably like it. After that, I read Paradais by Fernanda Melchor. This is about two young men from very different class backgrounds who are connected by the luxury housing complex that one of them lives in and the other one works at. They strike up a kind of friendship, but also kind of they hate each other. And most of the book is them coming up with a plan to carry out an incredibly horrific act. This deals with class in a really interesting way, and it also deals with like kind of disillusioned young men who think they're owed something, and like it's a very specific look into the brains of men who are like this. It's fucking freaky. The language can be really, really violent in this, and it does serve a purpose, and most of the time I appreciated that purpose. Sometimes I thought it was a bit over the top, and it leaned a little bit silly, like a little bit ridiculous, which maybe was the point. And took me a while to get into Melchor's writing style, because she is a lover of the run-on sentence, and that can be hard to deal with for sure, but I think she does end up doing it well. The last like 10 pages are all one sentence, but for a reason, and it feels really cool how she is telling a story through the structure of her writing, like down at such a basic level. This is very violent and gruesome and incredibly misogynistic, and it can be difficult to digest at times. The story that it takes you through and the insights into these young men's lives are fascinating. After that, I read my very favorite short story collection of the month, which is You Will Never Be Forgotten by Mary South. This is exactly what I'm looking for in a short story collection. It's kind of got like some magical realism twists, and it's like sort of like really fucking absurd, and deals with like technology and how humans react and respond and relate to technology, and like how we use it to avoid the big feelings that we don't want to feel. One of the stories is about an old folks home, and the patients there are calling sex hotlines, and the narrator of that story is a worker at the old folks home, and he's just like insufferable and so annoying, and it kind of delves into his relationship with his girlfriend from such a unique lens. I don't think that there was one story in here that I didn't... Oh, there was one story in here that I didn't love. Okay, almost every single story in here is so good. I also love the themes of grief mixed with the genre of magical realism. I couldn't put this down. My very favorite story in here is called Frequently Asked Questions About Your Craniotomy, and it's set up as like a series of question and answers. As it goes on, you get more insight and glimpses into the life and like emotions of the woman who's writing the answers to these questions. She's a neurosurgeon, and she's just like writing it for her office's website. Like, she drew the short stick, and as it goes on, it just kind of becomes more and more about her instead of about the questions that are being asked, and then the questions shift to be asking directly about the stories that she's telling. and the way it plays with structure is incredible. Something that I find in like witty or humorous short stories is that often the author's humor kind of like overrides the voices, especially like story to story, and it can make it hard to differentiate. And this doesn't have that. Each voice is so unique, but also so funny at the same time. And it's like very skilled writing to do that, I think. Next, I read, I think, the worst book that I read this month, which I kind of knew it was going to be, but I didn't know to what extent. That was The Test by Sylvain. It was so silly. I actually think this didn't have any potential with the premise that it has. It's just like a man goes to take a citizenship test and something horrible happens, and he's forced to make a decision that will change his life. The whole thing is so stupid. It was just a bad book. And I kind of knew it was going to be. Listen to the blurb. A deer is sitting the British citizenship test. He wants his family to belong. 25 questions to determine the worth of a life. 25 chances to impress. When the test takes an unexpected and tragic turn, a deer is handed the power of life and death. But how do you value another person's life when all you have is multiple choice? What did I expect from this book? It's stupid. It's so fucking stupid. This read like a YA book, but not even a good one. Even though it's definitely like intended for adults. The plot twist was so incredibly overdone, so tired. The only good thing I have to say about this book is that I think that it talked about what people and what bodies Western society values in a way that was either really insightful and well done, or just more insightful and well done than I was expecting from such a poorly written book. What's wrong with me? Like, why did I take this out and spend my time reading it? Really, like, I can't even complain. This was exactly what it says it's going to be. Dumb as hell. After that, I read Joseph Boyden's Wenjack. This is a historical fiction novella about a young Indigenous boy, a real young Indigenous boy who runs away from his residential school. This is so well written, and the structure of it is wild. Each of the little animals on the cover of this represent one of the chapters of this story. It shifts back and forth between the young boy Chani's perspective and the perspective of the spirits of the forest, who are like inhabiting different animals and watching him on his journey. And this story is so important, and it's so quick and not necessarily easy to read because it is very heavy and very sad, but I think everyone should read it, especially if you're Canadian or North American. This is a very important read and a very well done read. I think Joseph Boyden is a really good author. Next was another short story collection. This was sci-fi, and I am still not really sure what I thought about this. I think that if you are a sci-fi lover and if you like short stories, you will love this. I think for sci-fi, this was really well done. I don't know why I keep reading sci-fi, because I clearly don't like it that much. Because that was really all I struggled with this, is that I don't really like sci-fi that much. And I had just read such a good short story collection. It was hard not to compare it to that. And this is why I'm reading sci-fi, because a couple months ago, I had read Exhalation by Ted Chiang, and that's the best short story collection I've ever read, and it is straight like pure sci-fi. I was kind of comparing this to that, and that's not fair because this could not have lived up to that. The first story in here takes place entirely inside of a virtual reality RPG about like someone who works at the game's company trying to convince a player to log out. Another story happens in like the next ice age, like hundreds of years from now, when robots have taken over the planet, and it's about them discovering organic biology because there is no life on Earth other than the robots because everything is frozen over. That one is very long, but it is good. They're all good. I do think my only problem with this is that I don't like sci-fi that much. Like the science part. Like, I don't like the science part of the science fiction, and I felt kind of bored by it sometimes. It's very well written. I think the introduction is called On Breasts or something. A brief reflection on breasts. Amazing. I love her for that. This is translated from Korean, and it's a perfect translation. Maybe one of the best translations I've ever read. It's just like not for me personally. We only have like a few to go. The next book I read was Assembly by Natasha Brown. This takes place inside the head of a Black British woman who is going to her boyfriend's family's like garden party. It's a societal critique exploring like England's colonial legacy and racism and sexism, while also being a character study. She's trying to make this impossible choice while in an impossible and unjust situation that she has no control over. And it's a perspective that I haven't really seen before, of like health issues giving you autonomy. Like, what an interesting concept. It asks the reader to consider the physical repercussions of a life of oppression, and it also says a lot about like how systemic oppression leaks into the personal level and what that looks like, and it kind of asks you to consider how you yourself are implicated in this. I think it's crazy that this is a debut. The questions that it asks are so thought-provoking and the premise is so unique. I couldn't get enough of it. I think this quote is a really good representation just of the book generally. I must engage the question seriously. Why live? Why subject myself further to their reductive gaze, to this crushing objecthood? Why endure my own dehumanization? After that, I read The Tiger and the Cage by Emma Bolden. This is a memoir. It's kind of a medical memoir about how women are treated and not believed in the medical system by healthcare professionals. It is so frustrating. The injustice is like visceral. When Emma Bolden is in the 5th grade, she has this very strange experience with her teacher that induces a coughing fit that lasts for 2 weeks. And that is in her medical records. And so when later on she starts menstruating and has some of the most aggressive endometriosis I've ever heard about, that experience that she had as a 5th grader is used by doctors to not believe what she says about her own body. This is about being detached from your body in illness, and it's also about how the medical system detaches you from your body and from control and from autonomy. This is like such a page turner, which I don't find often happens in a memoir, especially a memoir that is kind of long. Like this one is like, I think, over 400 pages. What I did not understand about this book and kept jumping out at me, because this is about having endometriosis, is that she calls like menstrual pads Kotex, always, like with a capital K. I have never heard that in my life. It felt like there was a brand deal. I don't know if that's like an Alabama thing or a New York thing, because this book takes place in both places. I think people know what a pad is. I found it really strange. Overall, this was hard to put down because of all the things she's going through, but also hard to pick up because of those things, because it is very heavy and, like I said, very frustrating. She writes, I want to know. I want to remember, but I don't know what I want to remember. That I was faking it, which means I did have control over my body, even if I didn't have control over my emotions, or that I wasn't faking it, which means that I didn't have control over my body or my emotions. Just like a great memoir overall. After that, we have yet another short story collection and very short book. This is The Pump by Sydney Warner Bruman. And this takes place in a rural Ontario small town that has like a poisoned water supply and killer beavers. And it's a bunch of interconnected stories, which I really liked and I thought was really fun. Sometimes the connections between the stories were a little like contrived. In one story, this girl gets a terrible rash from the water supply and it causes her skin to peel off in chunks, and she has this obsessive urge to write on the chunks of skin that peel off. In another story, a teenager working at a gallery turns a blind eye to this other teenager who wants to eat little bits of the paintings without getting in trouble, in exchange for her communications with his dead best friend. It deals with small town queer relationships, religious bigotry, and like the kind of patriarchal abuse that fathers can get away with in smaller communities like this one. It's incredibly dark, very weird, and also very funny. And I think it's a testament to this author's writing that each of these stories can stand on their own but are also connected to each other. I found it very fun to piece together how everyone relates to everyone. It was very well done. Finally, my 24th book of June 2024 was Death Valley by Melissa Broder. This is about a woman who goes out into the California desert to kind of avoid the impeding death of her father, who's been in an accident, and also avoid her life at home with her very sick husband, who has a mysterious illness that no one can diagnose. While she's out there in the desert, she finds a giant cactus, which she climbs into, and very strange, surreal things happen. And through a series of unfortunate events, it becomes a survival story that takes place mostly in her head, but also in very vivid descriptions of what is happening to her out in the desert. As the story moves on and she becomes more desperate and delirious, the writing reflects that, and she becomes much more rambling and turns further and further inward, and her inner world is so rich and so interesting. I also thought this book was fucking funny. I laughed out loud multiple times while reading this. I love Melissa Broder's writing style, and I'm very ready to read Milk Fed, which I've heard really good things about, being like strange and funny in the same way that this was. There's themes of like anticipatory grief, self-discovery, avoidance tendencies. It is so witty and so sharp. This was a fantastic book to end the month on. I really enjoyed it, and I think I will enjoy all of her other writing. Those were the 24 books that I read in June. I hope this wasn't too boring, and thank you for listening. Okay, bye.